That's the
So,
saying.
do you want to start the episode? Like,
I
shall
I
we?
thought we'd started it a long time ago.
Shit.
No. Yeah, we could start and see what the fuck happens.
Okay.
Fuck no. Oh yeah, found it. Woo!
Page one.
It's in. So it says, thus it says in Völuspá, in the east lives the old one in Ironwood and breeds their Fenris kind. Out of them comes one particular sun's snatching trolls guise. He gorges the life of doomed men, reddens God's halls with red gore, dark in sunshine for summers after, all weathers hostile. Know you yet or what? So I was just wondering whether it was to do with the weather being shitty. whether they had the same kind of thing as we had over here. It's on. Are you reading it? Have you got the same one that I?
Yeah. So
page
this
page 15.
Yeah, this stuff. This is just where they're asked what is the origin of wolves, right? Gangleri asks, what is the origin of wolves? And Hai said, a certain giantess lives east of Midgard in a forest called Ironwood. In that forest live troll wives called Jarnvidir. The ancient giantess breeds as sons many giants and all in wolf shapes. Blah, 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 blah. And then comes the quote after that. Right.
Yeah. Because it was just the part where it says about all weathers hostile, and it just reminded me of that saying that we have in the UK of like red sky in the morning.
This is a reference to the Fimbulvetter, the 3 seasons long winter. And like it's so the origin of this stanza is in the Poetic Edda in Völuspá, where it's all about Ragnarok. Like Snorri, he takes Völuspá as poem and then he uses it wherever he wants to. That's what he's doing in this text. So he just like mashes it all together regardless of where it comes from.
So I wasn't being smart. Fuck.
But you weren't being unsmart either. It's like
I thought I was onto something. Well, there's a nice intro to the episode. So this is the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, the unsmart co-owner of Horns of Odin, and I'm joined as always by Dr. Mathias and Daniel.
Hello, everybody. I can hear that Dan is trying to rebrand himself from Dick Biter to the unsmart.
No, we're not carrying that on because this. For anybody listening, a few episodes ago, somebody asked. I can't remember, was it in the main show or was it in the? It might have been in one of our Patreon Q&As. Somebody asked what our Viking names would be. I can't remember what Mathias was. For some reason, mine, for whatever unknown reason, said I would.
It was because the question came up, how would you defend yourself? And we were in a conversation about that. And would you defend yourself by biting somebody's dick? And then you were like, I'd bite somebody's dick if that meant that I'd survive. And that's how you got the name Dick Biter.
I'm so glad that everybody remembers is better than me. So somehow, yeah, I stand by. If the situation arose where it was me or them, and I was faced with biting a dick or not, and it was a life or death situation, nom nom. That's all I'm gonna say.
I mean, I don't think anybody can blame you for that. Like, I totally do the same.
So the nickname happened apparently, but now it just will not disappear. It for anybody who isn't in our Facebook group, why not? But head over to Facebook and join the Nordic Mythology Podcast Facebook group because there is an abundance of memes and dick biter based memes. And now somebody bought the URL of the domain name dickbiter.com, which now forwards to our website. So it just will not disappear, and I don't know.
Perfect.
So I'm going to try and rebrand myself as.
I hope that somebody will buy the domain name True Norse and have that forward as well. And anything, I'm just happy that they've moved away from the memes about Norse to the memes about Dick Biter instead.
I know. You, to be fair, you did have it for a while for your Norse must die, but everyone, your Norse rants.
Yes.
And now I'm feeling the heat.
No, yeah, you are.
It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable.
It's funny. That's what it is.
It is funny. Thankfully, I've got a good sense of humor, and I find it funny. But when somebody bought the domain dickbiter.com, I wasn't 100% sure on how to take that one. That one, I was not unsettled, but I could see the funny side of it, but I was a little bit like, all right.
That's next level pranking. I like it. It's good. Yeah.
Oh, it is. I definitely see the humor by it. All right. We were meant to be joined by Brian Marshall, also, who's known as Where the Gods Lives. He's a horn carver. Unfortunately, he kind of had to cancel last minute. So we are going to throw together an episode based on Matthias's knowledge and me just sitting here and asking questions.
It's going to be a train wreck.
Oh, no, it won't be. Not as much of a train wreck as that first 5 minute segment about me being called Dick Biter. No, but before we do, I have a few thank yous to shout out, because I've been receiving gifts left, right, and center. So I apologize to you, Matthias, that people aren't sending you gifts. But what can I say? I must just engage with people that want to send me random presents.
Yeah, you're just more charming than me. That's it.
Maybe. No, the first one is after we had Christian on Art for Valhalla, the shield maker. Go back and listen to that one. We'd been speaking a while about making the horns of Odin shield, and you can see it over my shoulder here. And it is an absolute work of art. He's done a really amazing job on it. So everybody go and follow Art for Valhalla on Instagram. Christian makes some absolutely beautiful shields. And thank you very much for this one. And Matthias, you'll have to ask nicely and he might hook you up.
Maybe if I get my shit together and get the stuff that I need to sent to him, then maybe he would.
Yeah, no, I appreciate on the back side of this, he found the Farrand coat of arms that I didn't even know existed, and he's like carved that into the back of it. He's obviously taken a lot of time. I really do appreciate it. But then on to my favorite gift, which arrived today. Well, two gifts arrived today, completely out of the blue. Did not know they were coming. I guess that's the wonders of having your business address online. People can just send you stuff, apparently. One was a bottle of whiskey, which was very pleasant. That one I knew was coming. It was from a gentleman called Gregory. He asked if he could send me a bottle of whiskey because he enjoyed the podcast. I'm just guessing the shipping's too much to send it to you, Matthias. So,
it's okay. I have been offered bottles of whiskey before, and I actually turned them down because I feel it's a little much.
That shows the difference in character. I guess shows the difference in character between me and you, doesn't it?
I guess so.
I'm like, okay.
I mean, I think it's a great gesture. I'm just like, you don't have to spend that much money on me.
To be fair, I did say you don't have to. However, here is where you can find the address. Should you decide to?
There you go. Question: what kind of whiskey is it?
It's Highland Park.
Nice.
So that's not a cheap whiskey either.
That is not a cheap whiskey at all.
We're doing something right. And the second one, which is by far the most random thing I've ever received in my life, and I forgot to bring it home with me. So it's at work. I turned up to work and there was a little parcel on the carving desk, because I was like, I have no idea what that is. I was like, I don't know. It's come from Canada, all the way from Canada. Opened it up, and inside a little CD. Now, I haven't had a CD in a fucking long time. I don't even have a CD player anymore. Can you guess what the CD is?
What is it? A mixtape of love songs?
Oh no, it's Usher Confessions. So somebody has found Usher Confessions, probably in the bargain bin in Canada somewhere, and then taken the time to wrap it with a nice little note saying, if you know, you know, hope you enjoyed, thanks for the podcast, and then posted it halfway around the world for me out of the blue.
That is wonderful. That is love right there.
That I appreciate that more than the Shield because it's just good fun. No, I don't. I appreciate the Shield a lot more. But for anyone who doesn't know, go back and listen to our episode with Shane Smith, where you can hear me confess my appreciation for Usher, the song Usher Confession Part 2, which nobody else or everybody else pretends that they don't know, but really they do.
I can vaguely remember what Usher looks like from back in the 90s, and maybe he would like wear an all yellow tracksuit in one video. I can't remember. That's it. That's all I remember about that guy.
Maybe. No, it's to be fair. I'm very appreciative of the CD. It made me laugh earlier. It was a good thing to receive. So yeah, anybody who wants to send presents, you've got something to beat now. Got the bar has been set quite high, I think.
That is true.
All right, let's get into the actual episode and stop filling time because we don't have anything to talk about.
Hey, what are you talking about? We have a whole creation myth here.
We do. No, we do. This has been something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Actually, I'm quite glad that we get a chance to, because you give me a bunch of books to read and I very rarely read them. But I did actually start reading Snorri's Edda, and then as I was going through the creation myth, my mind was boggled at how bonkers it actually is, and I just messaged you instantly and be like, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about the armpits, the cow, the people
armpits and the cow, yeah.
The dwarves holding up the sky, all of it. We need to talk about all of it.
Yes, we definitely do. Yeah, but before we do that, we need to talk about the creation myth that came before the one that Snorri is giving us. Actually, the creation myths. Yes, because there are two other creation myths, or that's not exactly correct. What there are references to creation myths in the Eddic poems. So we have the prophecy of the Seeress, or Völuspá, that refers to the creation of the world in the beginning of the poem. And then we have the poems Vaftunia's sayings and Grimnia's sayings, or Vathuniasmal and Grimnismal, that also briefly refer to creation stories. And Snorri Sturluson uses them, and then a bunch of other material when he writes his creation story. And it is Snorri Sturluson's creation story that most people would know, at least partially. Mm-hmm. So it's actually a lot more complicated. There's different references. So let me just quickly throw in what does the Völva in the prophecy of the Seeress actually tell us about how the world is created?
I'll say before you start, I'm still confused from the episode we did with Bob 2 weeks ago. I think it will be 2 weeks ago when this comes out, because the one that you're talking about now was written down after Snorri's one was written down, but it's older. Is that right?
Yep.
Because that still confuses me. Could this not have been influenced by Snorri's one? In its
we know that it is older. So the prophecy of the Seeress, we know it's older because Snorri quotes it.
Oh, okay.
Right? But what Snorri what what we have in terms of like the prophecy of the seer is written down in its entirety as like a single poem, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is a manuscript that is younger than Snorri Sturluson's Edda.
Okay.
So, but
But
that doesn't mean that it didn't exist in writing before Snorri wrote it down.
okay.
It
So
means
we
we don't have that version of it. Okay, so what does this story tell us? Well, it goes, let's see. Oops, lost it for a second there. There we are. Okay. Early in time, this is Caroline Larrington's version or translation. Early in time, Ymir made his settlement. There was no sand, nor sea, nor cool waves. Earth was nowhere, nor the sky above. A void of yawning chaos, grass was there nowhere. Before the sons of Bor brought up the land surface, those who shaped glorious Midgard, the sun shone from the south on the stone hall, then the ground was grown over with the green leek. From the south, sun, companion of the moon, threw her right hand around the sky's edge. Sun did not know where she had her hall. The stars did not know where they had their stations. The moon did not know what might he had. Then all the powers went to the thrones of fate, the sacrosanct gods, and considered this. To night and her children they gave names, morning they named, and midday, afternoon, and evening to reckon up in years. Okay, so what is happening here is, first of all, we learn that there is a figure, some kind of being named Ymir, who apparently makes his settlement. That's a weird reference, especially when we know how Ymir in other contexts is like, cut into pieces and becomes the world. But that we will get to that in a second. So there's this figure called Ymir who exists, and then there's no sea, no sand, no cool waves, no earth, nothing. There was no sky, nothing at all. Right? There was a yawning chaos, or ginnungagap, as it is called in the Old Norse, which is a word that is difficult to translate. It probably means something like the void of magic, or the vast void. It can, there are different suggestions to how you can translate that word. And then we're told that the sons of Bor, they bring up or raise some kind of land surface. And then we're told that they create or shape Midgard. And then after that, the sun starts shining on Midgard, and it grows with green leek. And what green leek is a good question. Probably just like a general reference to green stuff, like trees and plants and stuff started growing. And then after that, there seems to be some kind of chaos when it comes to like the celestial bodies, the sun and the moon. They don't really know what they're doing. And that's when the gods then sit down on their thrones of fate, as Larrington chooses to translate them. It's the rökstolar, so that really means the thrones, or the chairs from which they reign or rule. These sacrosanct gods, Gin Heilig Goth, and then they give names to parts of the day and all that stuff. And so that suggests that by giving names to parts of the day and parts of the night, they're literally like putting, the sun and the moon's courses over the sky in order, right? Okay. And boom, there you have it. That's the creation of the cosmos in this version. There's a couple of things to note.
That's not as fun as Snorri's.
That is not as fun as Snorri's, first of all. Secondly, Ymir has no role except he's just there. Like, we're not, we have to infer based off of what we know from other sources that Midgard is created from his body. The poem doesn't tell us that. It might refer to that, but it's not certain that it actually is exactly that it refers to. Because we're also told that the sons of Bor bring up the land surface. And what the hell does that mean? And this is also like the original Old Norse is kind of complicated when difficult to translate because it goes bjöðum uppþó, and it means that they raised the ground or something like that. What are they doing? Is this like a cosmic creation story about lifting the world out of the ocean? We know those kinds of stories from other mythologies. Like, for instance, in the Finnish mythology, you have a similar type of story in Kalevala. We know similar types of stories from Native American mythologies. They're pretty common, actually. This idea that the world was created, for instance, by a bird, some kind of water bird that dives down and then picks up some mud and then places it on top of something that's floating in the ocean. And that's, for instance, like Native American mythologies often has that story where the world is built on top of the shield of a turtle who's like swimming around in the ocean, hence the reference to North America as Turtle Island. So that's
a cool story.
That is a cool story.
That's one I could get behind.
This could be a similar kind of story, but then it's like mixed with other elements or something like that. So all in all, we're not entirely sure what the hell the reference is here. But I personally, I think that the idea that we are dealing with that type of creation myth here is likely, and that Ymir, this reference to Ymir who makes his settlement, that's not exactly what it actually says. He doesn't make his settlement. He's like the reference is that he byggði, and that could be build, but also lived. So he could just have lived, right? And these stories typically, as I said, there's the turtle in Native American mythology. Sometimes it's a female character, like in Finnish mythology. Sometimes it's a giant of some kind that on which the world is built. So this could be a reference to that. A story where the gods, they build the world for humans on top of some primordial giant that's hanging out in a primordial sea. That might be a reference, that reference here. Okay, going on. Yes.
To me, it just sounds like Ymir's floating around in space, naked, nothing around, and then his sons pop up from nowhere. I don't know, how does he have sons? I can't be the only person who thinks logically about this.
Okay, so creation myths are seldomly particularly logical. Creation myths are always like, how was the world created? Yeah, you know what? There was like this giant, and then there was this like these dudes over here, and they like put some mud on top of that giant, and that's what we're walking on. So that's how it's worked out, right? Or there was like this god that came out of nowhere, and then he slayed a huge crocodile and made the world from that. Like, let's be honest here. It's like, it's a situation where somebody is like asking like, how was the world created? And somebody pulls an answer out of their ass. Okay, they
need to do better, because I've got too many questions. Like, what were his sons stood on to raise the ground up? Were they just flying? Were they floating?
So yes, yeah, something like that. They had wings. Okay, so here's the second creation story that we have in the poetry. This is stanzas 40 and 41 of Grimni's sayings, or Grimnismal. It goes, from Ymir's flesh the earth was made, and from his blood the sea, mountains from his bones, trees from his hair, and from his skull the sky. And from his eyelashes the cheerful gods made Midgard for men's sons, and from his brain the hard-tempered clouds were all created. Two stanzas basically giving you a sort of like detail of like the general elements of the world that come from the body of this primordial giant named Ymir.
So you can see where Snorri is getting some of his ideas from here.
Yes. So next level is Snorri's version, right? Where
Okay.
Snorri tries to make sense of all of this. And that is a major shit show.
So do you think he just takes these two, puts them together, and then just adds to it? Just kind of goes, okay, what else of this giant's body can we use to make stuff?
So what Snorri has done before he wrote this, right, is that he's heard these two stories, right? He's definitely heard the poems read or recited. He's also read them, it seems like. Also, by the way, just if anybody is wondering after our conversation with Bob, it might even have been Snorri who wrote all of this down, but it's been attributed to Snorri. We don't actually know.
Yeah, because apparently we don't have his original copy. We have a copy of his version.
Yep.
Which
that is 100 years younger than his, and it's the thing that says this was written by Snorri Sturluson, but we don't know if it was.
Oh, and by the way, in the middle of Snorri writing his and the copy of his being written, right in the middle of that, the poetic Edda is all wrote down.
Yes.
I feel like I'm going to fucking explode and start a fucking planet and a world, and someone's going to make a creation myth out of me after my head explodes listening to this.
I wouldn't blame you. This is not easy to follow. And
you know what? Yeah. Somebody in the chat will be making a note of how many times I referred to myself as a god, because somebody keeps a track of that. And apparently that will be me referring to myself as a god exploding and creating a civilization that people are going to look up to.
The dick biter god.
In the beginning there was a dick biter. I can see it now. In a few hundred years, who knows?
Okay. Do we want to hear the entirety of Snorri's creation story?
I think we should go through it, but not have you just read it front to back. You can read in it, and I'm just going to jump in and ridicule some of it as we
ask what the hell is going on
as we go. And this episode might come across as a bit silly, but that's because the creation myth is very silly, and it's good fun.
Yes, it is. Okay, so boom. Okay, so first of all, the story where Snorri Sturluson relates the creation of the world and a lot of other things is this section of Edda called Gylfaginning, which is essentially a story about a Swedish king who is stupid enough to get fooled by these dudes from Turkey who claim that they're gods. Okay, this is where we start. And he's then asking questions to these three dudes from Turkey, Haur, Jafnhaur, and Friði, which means the high one, the just as high, and the third guy, which is also just kind of weird naming. I don't know.
It feels lazy.
Right? It does feel lazy.
And it feels lazy.
And they are like, okay, they have like prepared like these magical visions for him as he's like traveling towards them. They know that he's coming, and so in order to really trick him, they've like made it look like they live in this cool castle and all kinds of funky stuff. And so they're sitting there, and then he comes and he asks all of these questions, and he starts by asking like, who is the highest of all the ancient gods, and who's the highest and most ancient of all gods. And then they begin talking about somebody who lives through all the ages and blah 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 and so on. And then they say he made heaven and earth and the skies and everything in them. Right? Who does this sound like to you?
Dick biter?
Yes, exactly. Dick biter, also known as God.
God.
Right? Yes, in a Christian context, right? And that is exactly what's
there is a lot of that when I was reading it, there was a lot that kind of popped up that was very much felt Christian. There was one in particular that he said that, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. There was like spot on for what I used to hear in Sunday school.
Yep. And this is because Snorri is riffing off of his own Sunday school here. So he says, he made heaven and earth and the skies and everything in them, then spoke third or 3D. But his greatest work is that he made man and gave him a soul that shall live and never perish, though the body decay to dust or burn to ashes. And all men who are righteous shall live and dwell with him himself in the place called Gimle or Vingölver. But wicked men go to hell and on to Niflhel. That is down in the 9th world. Then spoke Gangleri. What was he doing before heaven and earth were made? Then Hai replied, then he was among the frost giants. Gangleri spoke, what was the beginning and how did things start? And what was there before? Hai replied, as it says in the prophecy of the seeress, or Völuspá, it was in the beginning of time when nothing was. Sand was not, nor sea, nor cool waves. Earth did not exist, nor heaven on high. The mighty gap was, but no growth. This is Anthony Fox's translation of the stanza that I just read in Caroline Larrington's version, right? Just before, being told, he's basically quoting stanza 3 of the prophecy of the seeress. Okay. Then spoke just as high. It was many ages before the earth was created that Niflheim was made, and in its midst lies a spring called Hvergelmir, and from it flow the rivers called Svöl, Gunþrá, Fjörn, Fimbulthul, Slíður, and Hríður, Silgur, and Ylgur, Víður, Leiktur, Gjöp is next to hell gates.
He likes, well, that's the one thing I noticed, is he likes to list names.
You know, he's just riffing off of stuff that he's read here in this context. I'm pretty sure that comes from Grimnismal again. Like, he's just like reusing material that he's read in other poetry. Then spoke third. But first, there was the world in the southern region called Muspet. It is bright and hot. That area is flaming and burning, and it is impassable for those that are foreigners there and are not native to it. There is one called Surtur that is stationed there at the frontier to defend the land. He has a flaming sword, and at the end of the world, he will go and wage war and defeat all the gods and burn the whole world with fire. Thus it says in the prophecy of the seeress. Surtur travels from the south with the stick destroyer, that would be fire, shines from his sword the son of the gods of the slain. Rocks, cliffs crash, and troll wives are abroad. Heroes tread the road of hell, and heaven splits asunder. This is stanza 51 of the prophecy of the seeress that Snorri then takes and then adds to the beginning of his creation myth, right? So he's just taken stanza 3, and now he's adding stanza 51 from a narrative that is entirely different, right?
Okay.
So as you can see here, what he's basically doing is that he's cherry picking the content of the prophecy of the seeress to create his own story about the creation of the world. And he has just told us that there is a realm called Niflheimr and a realm called Muspelheimr. Niflheimr is cold and has these rivers running out of it. Muspelheimr is full of fire. What he is doing here is that he is essentially going along with Neoplatonic philosophy. The idea like that there must be hot and cold for the world to be created. You know, the elements. Okay. Then he goes on. Gangleri spoke. What were things like before generations came to be and the human race was multiplied? Then spoke High, these rivers, which are called Ielivaugar, when they had got so far from their source, these are flowing out of Niflheim, right? That the poisonous flow that accompanied them began to go hard like the clinker that comes from a furnace. It turned to ice. And when this ice came to a halt and stopped flowing, the vapor that was rising from the poison froze on the top in the same direction and turned to ice. And this rime increased layer upon layer right across Ginnungagap. Then spoke just as high. Ginnungagap, the part that faces in a northerly direction, was filled with the weight and heaviness of ice and rime, and there was vapor and a blowing inwards from it. But the southerly part of Ginnungagap cleared up in the face of the sparks and molten particles that came flying out of the world of Muspet. Then spoke third, just as from Niflheim there rose coldness and all things grim, so what was facing close to Muspet was hot and bright, but Ginnungagap was mild as a winter sky, and when the rime and the blowing of the warmth met, so that it thawed and dripped, there was a quickening from these flowing drops due to the power of the source of the heat, and it became the form of a man, and he was given the name Ymir. But the frost giants call him Örgelmir, and from him are descended the generations of frost giants.
Ooh, those pesky frost giants.
Right?
It feels like the whole thing is just, it's just struggling to make it make sense. Like each bit's just barely hanging on and keeping it together, and just really trying to, even you reading it, and I'm sure you've read this hundreds of times.
I've written a dissertation about this.
And even you reading it, it feels like you're not struggling to read, but like struggling
sense of it.
Yeah, struggling to make sense of it. Even now, just putting the words together, you're even questioning what you're reading, even though you've read it that many times.
Because it's so ridiculously convoluted. And also, how does it make sense that the world of Niflheim is like cold and full of frost and so on, but they're like rivers flowing out of it that then crust over and become like ice when they leave that world? That doesn't make any sense.
I didn't think of that.
I thought of that, and that is and we have our good producer Shan noting in the chat that it makes sense if it's lava, and that is exactly what I wrote my dissertation on. Because this is, if you ask me, an image of lava flowing from a source, possibly under a glacier. And this is something that Snorri Sturluson could have seen in his lifetime. There were a couple of volcanic eruptions around the time that he lived. And this is also something that Icelanders were, of course, familiar with. Every generation in Iceland has experienced a volcanic eruption. So it's not impossible that this is actually a reference to that. And the use of like words like ice and frost and so on is because the Icelandic vocabulary lacks any accuracy when it comes to volcanic activity. They didn't even really have a word for volcano. So that's actually meaningful in that sense, right? But he has like this idea of the world which is based firmly on medieval cosmology. So Christian medieval cosmology. The world is like a disk with cold up top and hot below, right? And cold defines the edges of Europe, which is, actual realizations that they have had going north, right? Whereas hot defines the edges of Africa, to the extent that Europeans were familiar with the African continent. They're, of course, familiar with the fact that Sahara is fucking hot, right? And there's no indications that they knew much about what was beyond Sahara, but they did know that Sahara existed. So there's a natural, right, in that world view to be like, oh, it's cold that way and hot that way. So that means that our nice climate here in, for instance, Rome is stuck between the two extremes of like ice up north and very, very hot weather down south. So this is what Sturluson is riffing off of. His knowledge of classical literature and this learned medieval literature in Latin. And he tries to make sense of what he knows from Nordic mythology in that context.
He does also say heaven and hell quite early on. And you get people who we both spoken to, and I've seen your conversations of people have been like, yeah, Snorri's not influenced by Christianity. Like, some people genuinely think that he's not, but then he clearly says, yeah, heaven and hell, bad people go to, he says bad people go to hell.
And, to those people, I would just, read the first two words of his book that start the prologue to Edda, which are Almighty God. Do we need to keep going? Like, come on. If you think that Snorri was not influenced by Christianity, just start with page 1. Almighty God created heaven and earth and all things in them, and lastly 2 humans from whom generations are descended, Adam and Eve, and their stock multiplied and spread all over all the world. But as time passed, mankind became diverse. Some were good and orthodox in faith, but many more turned aside to follow the lusts of the world and neglected God's commandments. And so God drowned the world in a flood. There's even the flood is referenced. Okay? It's like he starts with biblical history. Anybody who claims, oh, he was not he had nothing to do with Christianity, or he was seeking pagan, blah, 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 does not know what they're talking about. Because he gives us all the Christian history first, and then he tells us and he explains how all of this Nordic mythology came about. It was a bunch of people who essentially had forgotten the name of God, had forgotten true faith, and started misunderstanding how the world functioned. And that's the explanations that he's then giving us in the creation myth. So that's his position. And this is also why he's trying from a Christian perspective, that's all he's doing, trying from a Christian medieval perspective to make sense of Nordic mythology. So he has these poems, he's read the prophecy of the seeress, read that creation myth, he's read the Grimnir's sayings, read that creation myth, he's read Vafthrûdnir's sayings, and read the same reference to creation myth that is similar to that one in Grimnir's sayings there. And then he's like synthesizing all of this with, the banner, this needs to look like Christianity.
Yeah. And I mean, I can sympathize with why people find it frustrating that it's so influenced by Christianity, and maybe even like try to deny, because you get if you like kind of get into this community, people really love it, and especially when you start getting sort of into pagan, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it without upsetting anyone, I guess. But fuck it. So I think people get very obsessive over this and don't read maybe the source material, and they won't have actually read Snorri's Edda. They will just read snippets online, and there is very much this Christian bashing kind of thing that goes on. In you have to take a second to look in any Facebook group of people who are very much on that entry level into this community, have come through from TV shows, and which I was amongst that at some point until I kind of started doing this and the podcast. But on that kind of entry level, who who only have time to read certain bits and have they only dip their toes into this world. And there's very much that Christian bashing thing, but they also then know that most of what we know about the mythology comes from Snorri's Edda. But then someone comes along and says, oh, by the way, that thing that for the thing that you like, that you bash Christianity for, that actually is written by a Christian and has a lot of Christian influences in it. You can see why, for the people who kind of on the fringe and don't have a deeper understanding, just go, huh? What? That can't be true. And dig their heels in. So you can kind of understand why that would happen. But you, as soon as, like, I hadn't read it until a few weeks ago when you were like, read it. I was like, okay. And then as soon as
after 2 years of doing this podcast.
Exactly. And then as soon as I read it, I messaged you and I'm like, how can anybody say that this isn't influenced by Christian? And your reply was because they haven't read it. And I think that's the case for so many people. Unfortunately,
but it's also so it's not. There's a couple of things to say here. First of all, if you come from a standard Christian cultural background in Europe or North America or something like that, I mean, you're going to be blind to many of the things that are like obviously Christian in the material too, because it will just resonate with you based off of the fact that you've grown up in a Christian culture. It takes a lot of skill and learning to be able to look beyond that layer of Christianity that is in this material and actually be able to distinguish what could be, not what is, but what could be a sort of like original pre-Christian element and what is a Christian interpretation by a medieval author who's trying to make sense of this, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, wishful thinking. People who get into this and, you know, those Christian bashing and so on, people who are on their way to establishing an identity that, for instance, rejects elements of the Christian culture that they come from, which can be a very healthy thing to do. And they will, of course, then also have like a negative view of Christianity. And that is also, you know, making decisions based off of not liking something is always a path to doing it wrong. You know, that's not why you would want to do it, right? That's not why you would want to criticize the Christian content of this material just because it's Christian. No, you want to criticize the Christian content of this material to understand what did people actually believe in? What did they actually think prior to the introduction of Christianity in Scandinavia?
I think that's a good point. I think that's probably where a lot of people fall down, is that they hear you say, oh, he's a Christian, right, in a Christian country, influenced by Christianity, and they go, so they get offended and think that you're just saying it's all bullshit, it's all Christian, and it's not. All you're saying is that you need to be objective in your reading of it and keep that in mind, so then you can better understand what pre-Christian people thought. But people just get super tetchy and go, oh no, you're saying it's all Christian, fuck you. And it's like, exactly. No, that's not the point.
No, that's not the point. And also, like, you know, it would be easy to then like get this idea that Snorri was some kind of like some dude sitting there like laughing with an evil laughter while he was writing all this, haha, I'm going to turn all this pagan stuff into Christianity. But that's not what he was doing either, I'm sure. He was just trying to make sense of it all, right? And he grew up in a world where everything was defined by Christian teaching. If it was him who wrote this, he was a very, very well educated and intelligent man who had managed to become that without actually being part of church clergy. Keep that in mind. He did not receive a formal church education. He just received the type of education that a high-ranking elite member of Icelandic society would receive at that time, right? So he had access to a bunch of books that came from Italy, France, England, Germany, Greece, and translations of that in particular. And that's what he has then used to try to make sense of the indigenous material that was circulating both orally and in literary texts in his time.
Mhm.
When he went to parties, right, at the General Assembly, right, for instance, there would be somebody who would probably recite the prophecy of Cyrus in some kind of entertainment contest. They're all sitting there drinking, and then they will hear this ancient poem from our ancestors, right? And Snorri was then the guy who was like, oh, that's interesting. Let me write that down in some kind of context and try to make sense of that, right? So that makes him a pretty cool dude, if you ask me.
Mhm.
Like that's a cool intellectual pursuit to be like, to be that guy who's like, oh wow, this is really fascinating ancient material. Let me try to put that into a book and make it accessible to other people. He was a fucking hero for that. Because that's why we have this material today, right? That's why we consider bigger about it. I want to attach another thing to this, is people misunderstanding the content of his book and assuming that it's pagan. This is also because popular presentations of this material take it out of its context. So for instance, if you pick up a book from like Barnes and Nobles or something like that, on Nordic mythology or Old Norse mythology, it will have the creation myth in there, but it will not have the bit that has to do with Christianity.
Mhm.
It'll just tell you about how there were these like Niflheimer and Muspelheimer and this cow that came in the middle of everything, and Ymir, and then right. So people are in that sense fooled by the presentation of the material.
And that's probably how most people have seen it. They haven't read like the actual translation of it. They've just picked up bits within books on a general Norse mythology that they've read. They haven't sat and actually looked at the source material. And also probably picked up on websites, because there's a bunch of websites out there that you can read it. But again, it's kind of shortened down and it removes the Christian bits and just gives you this nice, because it is a fun story. It's a better story. All the craziness. It's a fun time. So you can see why they choose to have that bit in, and if they don't have that deeper understanding, they don't see that what they're doing is wrong. They just kind of go, oh, this stuff's cool, let's put this in the book.
The thing is also, you have to keep in mind that this material is about 800 years old, right? That means that you've already heard bits and pieces of it, right? I have to explain a lot of it to make it accessible to our modern ears, because it doesn't just make sense, right? You also have to keep in mind that to him it didn't just make sense. He also had to take it through several rounds of interpretation to understand the context and meaning of all of this, right? These are important aspects, right? Because what happens then when a modern author, like me, for instance, tries to make this popularly available in books? Well, go take my Old Norse Mythology for Kids book and sit down and read that next to Snorri's Edda and Eddic poems. And then you'll see that I have changed a lot of things and moved stuff around and given different names to different things and so on. Because a lot of it is, not just easily accessible in the way that it was originally written, right? And that's so any author will have to do that to some extent, right? They'll have to find a way to present this material in a digestible way to a modern audience without, and then you have the question, like, how much can I change it? How much should I change it? And on what grounds should I change it? So it becomes a very complicated question from there.
It's all very
Everybody's giving me shit for like plugging my book on my own podcast. Guys, I don't even get royalties from that book, so I don't get it paid. So there
Plug
you go.
Go buy it from hornsvoting.com. We stock it.
There you go. He doesn't pay me anything for it anyway.
I'll plug it. He gets nothing, but I do. So no, we have both your books. You have the House True book as well. Before we move on from Snorri, because I do want to get through the creation myth and we keep getting distracted. Jim said, and this is one argument I see time and time again when it comes to Snorri, and it's still holding Snorri up as like this pagan hero. And it's like, well, what if he had to put the Christian stuff in to sneak it past the Christian overlords who were checking the book to preserve the pre-Christian myths? It's like he hid it within the Christian material and kind of ticked the box of being a good Christian boy, but all along he wanted to get the pre-Christian stuff through. Is that possible? Was Snorri doing that?
Let me just read to you what Snorri Sturluson expresses of his own opinion on this material in chapter 58.1, epilogue in Skálskaparmál, so the next section. He goes, but these things have now to be told to young poets who desire to learn the language of poetry and to furnish themselves with a wide vocabulary using traditional terms, or else they desire to be able to understand what is expressed obscurely. He's talking about the poetry here. Then let such a one take this book as scholarly inquiry and entertainment. But these stories are not to be consigned to oblivion or demonstrated to be false, so as to deprive poetry of ancient kennings, which major poets have been happy to use. Yet, Christian people must not believe in heathen gods, nor in the truth of this account in any other way than that in which it is presented at the beginning of this book, where it is told what happened when mankind went astray from the true faith. And after that, about the Turks, how the people of Asia, known as the Aesir, that's the gods, right, distorted the accounts of the events that took place in Troy so that the people of the country would believe that they were gods. He is very clear about his position.
That feels like at the start of a TV show when it says this is for entertainment purposes only.
Yeah, that is exactly what it is. That is exactly what he's saying. This is for entertainment purposes only. I've explained to you how these stories came to be. They're essentially misunderstandings that people have believed in, which were deliberately created by the Aesir, who are the people who come from Asia, Turkey, where Troy is, where they have basically used the story about Troy to fashion all of these myths. That's what he's saying. And that's what he definitely believed it was. He's very clear on that. He was not trying to mask paganism and like bring it on for posterity. He was trying to make pagan poetry accessible to Christians. Mm-hmm. And he was a Christian himself. Definitely.
There you go. Should we get back to the craziness, because we have some fun stuff to get through?
Yes.
And also, Shan, make a note that for entertainment purposes only should be the title of the episode.
Yes. Okay, so I'm just going to skip some quotes that are a little too complicated, and then we go to, then spoke Gangleri. How did generations grow from him? That's Ymir, of course. And how did it come about that other people came into being? Or do you believe him to be a god whom you had just spoken of? Then Hai replied, not at all do we acknowledge him to be a god. He was evil and all his descendants. We're still talking about Ymir here. We call them frost giants, and it is said that when he slept, he sweated. Then there grew under his left arm a male and a female, and one of his legs begot a son with the other, and descendants came from them. These are frost giants. The ancient frost giants, him we call Ymir. Then spoke Gangleri. And also, by the way, this is one of the very few references to frost giants there are in Nordic mythology. Like this like we when we, for instance, watch a Marvel movie with Thor in it, it's like frost giants everywhere. And it's like, that's not the mythology though. The mythology is very scant when it comes to frost giants.
Yeah, but frost giants make for cool TV though.
It does. They do sound cool. Anyway, then spoke on where did Ymir live and what did he live on? The next thing, when the rhyme dripped, was that there came into being from it a cow called Idhumla, and 4 rivers of milk flowed from her teats, and it fed Ymir. Then spoke Gangleri, what did the cow feed on? Hai said, it licked the rhinestones, which were salty. And the first day as it licked stones, there came from the stones in the evening a man's hair. The second day a man's head. The third day there was a complete man there. His name was Buri, and he was beautiful in appearance, big and powerful. He begot a son called Bor. He married a wife called Bestla, daughter of the giant Bolthur.
All right, they
had 3 sons.
Let's go back a minute because there's some stuff going on there.
Yep.
So where do we start? Okay, the cow.
Yes.
Why a cow? Like, it feels
why
like
not, man? Okay, so there's a couple of sort of like socio-historical explanations for the cow. One is that cattle and the cow in an Icelandic context would be a pretty sort of high status animal. So that might be the reason that it's not a goat, but it could also just be something Snorri pulled out of his ass.
The sucking of the teat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's any relation to like babies breastfeeding?
Well, I mean, obviously there's like that idea that that is of course, breastfeeding is of course part of it, right? Any infant animal or mammal, right? Could be the inspiration here. Our chat is bouncing around ideas about sacred cows in India. There is the Indo-European theory too, that this is like an ancient element of an Indo-European mythology where cows and cattle in general were really important. That's also possible. It's also, kind of a stretch to start talking about that.
Mm-hmm. Kim said about Romulus and Remus, which are a prime example, because I mean, I think Roma football clubs still have their symbol as them suckling the wolf.
Yeah,
I think.
And there are plenty of these types of endogonies and anthropogonies. What the fuck do you call them? I can never pronounce that word. Anthropogonies. Yeah, there you go.
Me too. I struggle with that one. Always just dropping that into conversation.
But the point is that there's plenty of stories like that out there, right? And usually it is because the particular animal that is chosen in the particular context of creating such a myth has a high status in society, right?
Mm-hmm. A wolf's just cooler than a cow, isn't it? There's just a cow.
A wolf is cooler than a cow, right?
But I guess a cow, it's fair to say that a cow back 800 years ago would not resemble what a cow is today.
Well, a cow back then would mean, like, if you had a cow, you were wealthy, right? If you had a lot of cows, you were very wealthy.
Oh, I just meant like physically, the cow probably would have been a lot different. It would have been more like a wild cow rather than the nice little dairy cows that we have in the field. I'm sure they would have been completely different.
Not completely different, but a little different, yeah. But still, though, I mean, I think that the reason for that being a prevalent image is because it's a high status animal. You have to have a lot of grass for one of those, and you have to have sheds and the ability to harvest hay for it so that you can keep it fed through the winter in a very cold place like Iceland. So that would be something that could, yeah.
I love how my sticking point is the cow and not the fact the cow licked a salt lick into a human.
So that's the next question we have
I
to
feel
ask ourselves.
like the cow was the issue in that sentence, not not him licking a human to life.
Yeah, I can't explain that part though. Like that's
So that's bonk. What? I mean, I guess it does explain where Ymir's children come from.
his armpits.
No, I thought I thought that's who the cow licked into existence.
No, so Ymir, he's creating the frost giants from his armpits and between his legs.
But does
like his legs are like having sex with each other. It's really weird. It says blah blah blah. Then there grew under his left arm a male and a female, and one of his legs begot a son with the other.
Oh no, you're spoiling it. We haven't got to that bit yet.
Yeah, we did. That was before the other things.
Did I miss that?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
So what is happening here is that you have Ymir creating a generation of beings, right, from his own body. Then you have the cow that is licking these salty rocks that then create that there's apparently a human caught in that.
But isn't the person who's created by the cow licks, is it Bor?
Buri, yeah.
Buri. But doesn't I'm just
his name is Buri.
Buri. Bori. You make noises with your mouth that my mouth can't do. I can't make those noises. It's not fair. Okay, but doesn't the series say that that's Ymir's son? Or he's
no, we don't know where he comes from in the prophecy of the series.
Oh, I thought in the prophecy series they said that was his son. That's my.
She says that the sons of Bor create Midgard.
Oh, okay. Right.
And this is it's not a parrot stat. He says, right? So he says the guy who comes from the salty rocks, that's Buri. He was beautiful in appearance, big and powerful. He begot a son called Bor. That's the same, presumably, as the guy who's
okay,
dad of the Bor sons.
Okay.
And this is what.
So none of the humans are actually descended from Ymir.
No. Well, so humans aren't even part of this yet.
Okay, well, yeah, but humans, I was just thinking like God figures, like.
Okay, yeah.
Like,
so what happens next is that Bor marries Bestla, daughter of Bölthur, right? And that's a giant. Bölthur is a giant, and he must be descendant of Ymir, but we don't actually know. It's not like directly stated that he descended from Ymir. We're just assuming this. Okay, blah 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 blah, and then Bestla and Bor, they have 3 sons. One was called Odin, second Vili, and the third Vie. And that's when we get to the gods, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And they are, according to Snorri, the sons of Bor. That's, of course, not what we're told in the prophecy of the Seers. We don't know who the sons of Bor are there.
Okay.
We just kind of assume that they're the same. That sons of Bor could also be more than 3 in the prophecy of the Seers. There are no numbers attached to them here. We learn that there are 3 here, though. And then he says, or this is Hai who says this, and it is my belief that this Odin and his brothers must be the rulers of heaven and earth. It is our opinion that this must be what he is called. This is the name of the one who is greatest and most glorious that we know, and you would do well to agree to call him that too. This right here is sort of like heretical Christianity, because we have a Trinity that they're talking about that they believe in as the highest being. Like, this is a reference to the Trinity.
Yeah.
God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Now, where did Snorri get the names from? He probably got them from stories that he had heard at some point. Odin, Vili, and Vie. So there's a lot to be said about like that trinity of male creator gods that does exist in previous Germanic history. Tacitus has 3 as well. They are also from a figure who is generated from a figure who comes from the ground, from the earth, the earthborn Twisto, which is similar to this Buri figure, right?
Okay.
So there is something to be said for a very deep history to this particular bit that he's talking about here. But he has his own version of it. And again, that is a very Christian interpretation. So yeah, and then we get to the part where they kill Ymir. He says,
"This is the best bit, obviously."
Yeah. Then then spoke Gangleri. How did they get on together? Which group was the more powerful? Then Hai replied, Bor's sons killed the giant Ymir. And when he fell, so much blood flowed from his wounds that with it they drowned all the race of frost giants, except that one escaped with his household. Giants call him Bergelmir. He went up on his ark.
I remember this.
With his wife, and was preserved there. And from them are descended the families of frost giants, as it says here. And then he quotes Vafthrudnir's sayings. And the quote goes, countless winters before the earth was created, then was Bergelmir born. That is the first I remember, when that wise giant was laid in a box. And this is where Snorri does something very nifty. He literally interprets the word box as ark, so that he can refashion this drowning of the frost giants as the first flood, Noah's flood. And Bergelmir is the giant version of Noah.
These sneaky. He's a sneaky boy.
Sneaky. So again, he takes a stanza from a poem that has an entirely different context. He refashions that stanza so that it fits into universal Christian history. And that's how you get a quote unquote flood in Nordic mythology. And then he goes on. Then Gangleri replied, what did Bor's sons do then, if you believe that they are gods? See, now he's getting like skeptical. You believe these guys are gods? What's going on here? And he goes, Hai said, there is not just a little to be told about that. They took Ymir and transported him to the middle of Ginnungagap, and out of him made the earth, out of his blood the sea and the lakes. The earth was made of the flesh and the rocks of the bones. Stone and scree they made out of the teeth and molars and of the bones that had been broken. Then spoke just as Hai. Out of the blood that came from his wounds and was flowing unconfined, out of this they made the sea with which that they encompassed and contained the earth, and they placed this sea in a circle round the outside of it, and it will seem an impossibility to most to get across it. What he's basically describing here is sort of like the gory horror version of those medieval flat Earth maps with a sea encircling everything. Then spoke third. They also took a skull and made out of it the sky and set it up over the earth with 4 points. And under each corner, they set a dwarf. Their names are Östri, Vestri, Norri, Sydri. Then they took molten particles and sparks that were flying uncontrolled and had shot out of the world of Muspet and set them in the middle of the firmament of the sky, both above and below, to illuminate heaven and earth. They fixed all the lights, some in the sky, some moved in a wandering course beneath the sky, but they appointed them positions and ordained their courses. Thus it is said in ancient sources that by means of them days were distinguished, and also the count of years, as it says in the prophecy of the series. And then he quotes the stanza that I read about how the gods, or how the sun and the moon didn't know where the dwelling was and all that stuff. So what he's doing here is that he's riffing off of that description that I read earlier from Grimnir's sayings about creating the world from the body of the giant Ymir. And then he takes that stanza from the prophecy of the seers and adds that to it, and then he goes on like this. That is what it was like above the earth before this took place. Then spoke a Gangleri. This is important information that I have just heard. That is an amazingly large construction and skillfully made. How was earth arranged? Then Hai replied, it is circular around the edge, and around it lies the deep sea, and along the shore of this sea they gave lands to live in to the races of giants. But on the earth, on the inner side, they made a fortification round the world against the hostility of giants. And for this fortification, they used the giant Emir's eyelashes, and they called the fortification Midgard. They also took his brains and threw them into the sky and made out of them the clouds, as it says here. And then he quotes Grimnir's sayings that I read to you earlier.
So in that, it sounds like he's saying Midgard is the name of the fortification, not the place.
Yeah,
safe from the fortification.
Yep, and that's what he's saying now. So two things. When he says about the world, it is circular around the edge, and around it lies the deep sea. He's literally like describing what a medieval map looks like. And then when he starts talking about that Midgard fortification, he's literally describing what an Icelandic farms looks like. That Icelandic farms will have that, little fence around,
Okay.
And his own little castle in Borgarfjörður would have had, that as well. Like
the vertical.
Rampart really would have been around his little castle in Borg.
Yeah, so it's just like the vertical sticks all next to each other with like a cross part holding them together to make a fence panel type thing, I guess.
Yeah, or even taller, with like dirt piled up on the backside of it, so that you have a vertical exterior.
Okay.
That you can defend yourself from there, right?
Okay.
So that's what he's describing here. He's describing his own little home.
Okay.
And to an Icelander, this also makes sense, right? Because Iceland itself is a landmass with an encircling sea, right? And that if you sail north, it's going to get really cold, and if you sail south, it's going to get hot at some point, if you're learned at least. And so this all makes perfectly sense to a guy like him.
So what about Midgard being the actual fence, though? Is that's
his interpretation?
Okay, because that's what I think. Obviously, to everybody that listens to this, it's like Midgard is the place where we all live.
So we know that the word Midgard is very old. It existed in Scandinavian culture long before the Viking Age. There are references to Midgard on runestones too. So this is like this is what they did call the world, and this is probably a Germanic translation of Greek and Latin references to the world. And you know, the idea of the world being a place that is centered with an ocean around it goes far beyond Christianity. That this was how you also saw Greeks and Roman representing the world on maps. To varying degrees of like detail and such things. And so this was probably how people in those Germanic tribes in the 300s and 400s, they probably also saw the world like that. And so that's inconspicuous, but Snorri is translating it to his own Icelandic context to sort of like say this is what it looks like. And you know what, a Norwegian probably would have seen it differently, and a Swede for that matter, or a Dane. So that's another thing to keep in mind here, that is like this does not represent how other Scandinavians would have seen their world. They probably thought of it very differently. And then, by the way, he goes on to talk about the creation of humans, right? Because that's the next thing that happens. Then spoke Gangleri. A great deal, it seems to me, they had achieved when earth and heaven were made, and sun and stars were put in position, and days were separated. And where did the people come from who inhabit the world? Then Hai replied, as Bor's sons walked along the seashore, they came across two logs and created people from them. The first gave breath and life, the second consciousness and movement, the third a face, speech and hearing and sight. They gave him clothes and names. The man was called Asgard, the woman Embla, and from them were produced the mankind to whom the dwelling place under Midgard was given. After that, they made themselves a city in the middle of the world, which is known as Asgard. We call it Troy. So again, here, what he's using is stanzas 17 and 18, if I remember correctly, of the prophecy of the Cirrus, where he is reinterpreting some wording in there. The prophecy of the Cirrus tells us that humans were created in the following manner. Blah, 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 until three gods, strong and loving, came from out of that company. That's presumably the Aesir that we're referring to here. They found on land capable of little, Asgard and Embla, lacking in fate. Breath they had not, spirit they had not, blood nor bearing nor fresh complexions. Breath gave Odin, spirit gave Heinir, blood gave Lodur, and fresh complexions. Boom. So this is like Snorri is reinterpreting aspects of these two stanzas. One, he talks about the sons of Bor. These stanzas talk about Odin, Heinir, and Lodur, which we don't know if they're the sons of Bor or what they are. He tells us that they find humans as logs on the shore. So anybody who has lived on a North Atlantic shore will know that logs will drift onto it at some point. So that's really what he's referring to here, and like that's what he has seen. And then he says that the gods turned those into humans, and that's how humanity was created. That's not what this text is saying, though, in the prophecy of Cirrus. They're just talking about that they found Asgard and Embla on land, whatever that means. And we don't know if they were trees or they were actually humans, but the context actually seems like, because just before these two stanzas, we hear about the creation of all the dwarfs, right? And the dwarfs are described as mannliki, so in the image of humans. So it might actually be that these Asgard and Embla in the prophecy of Cirrus, they come from dwarves. So that means that we were all dwarves.
I mean, that could be said about me anyway. Oh, we did mention about me being called Gimli in the Ruth Tolkien episode. I mean, yeah, it just all seems incredibly complicated.
I just want to attach one little detail or one comment to this aspect of like Troy, because people are like, why does he keep ranting about Troy? So Troy was in medieval European history like the legendary place where everybody came from. This goes all the way back to the Romans, right? We have Virgil's Aeneid, or whatever you call it in English, where we get this origin of Rome, which is, you know, a spin-off on Troy, right? Romulus and Remus's mother, what the fuck was her name? Can't remember. She fled from Troy, and that's how Rome was founded. So Rome, this is because Troy is the most, as in terms of like European mythology, the most awesome legendary city that was ever built, right?
Okay.
And that's why the Romans wanted to associate with it. And then you get various spin-off versions of that story later on when the Franks establish the Frankish kingdom in what is now the Rhineland, Belgium, northern France, and parts of Germany, right? They also say that they descend from Troy. And you see other European royal houses promoting that same idea. And this is exactly what the Scandinavians didn't latch on to. They're like, oh yeah, we also come from Troy. And that's why, because Odin, right, he is in Scandinavian history the ancestral god of various kings, right, and various royal houses, the dynasties. So it makes sense that the Christian version of that story would be that Odin is in fact just some dude, and that dude came from Troy. And so this is what's happening in Snorri's Edda. He gives us this description in the prologue. Like, so he's really just repeating what he says in the prologue, where he goes, he gives us some weird story about King Priam, who there we are. Near the middle of the world was constructed that building and dwelling which has been the most splendid ever, which was called Troy. We call the land there Turkey. This place was built much larger than others and with greater skill in many respects, using the wealth and resources available there. 12 kingdoms were there and one high king, and many countries were subject to each kingdom. In the city, there were 12 chief languages. The 12 rulers of the kingdoms were superior to other people who have lived in the world and in all human qualities. Blah, 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 long, weird, like ancestry where Thor is actually the like some ancestor to Odin, and then Odin is some ancestor to himself, blah, blah, blah. Very confusing, really. And then we get to, I mean, he even uses the Old English Woden, who's then the father of Odin, right? And then we get to Odin. He was an outstanding person for wisdom and all kinds of accomplishments. His wife was called Frigida, whom we call Frigg. Odin had the gift of prophecy, and so did his wife. And from this science, he discovered that his name would be remembered in the northern parts of the world and honored above all kings. For this reason, he became eager to set off from Turkey and took with him a very great following, young people and old, men and women, and they took with them many precious things. And whatever countries they passed through, great glory was spoken of them, so that they seemed more like gods than men. There you go. and they did not halt their journey until they came north to the country that is now called Saxony. Odin stayed there a long while and gained possessions of large parts of that land. There, Odin put in charge of the country 3 of his sons. One's name was Vegdek. He was a powerful king and ruler over East Saxony. His son was Vitorgits. His sons were Vitta, and then he got like this long descendancy, blah, blah, blah. Then it goes on. Odin's 3rd sons were Siki, his son Reria. This dynasty ruled over what is now called France. And from it is descended the family called the Volsungs. Oops. From all these people, great family lines are descended. Then Odin set off north and came to a country that they called Hreðgotaland. That's where I'm from. That's Jutland. And gained possession of all he wished in that land. He set over the area a son of his called Skjöldur. His son was called Friðreif. From them is descended the family called the Skjöldungs. They are kings of Denmark, and what was then called Hreðgotaland is now called Jutland. After that, Odin went north to what is now called Sweden. There was a blah blah blah, and then he just ends up like becoming like the grandfather of royal houses from like Germany all the way to Iceland. And that's what all of this is about. And it's just to claim that the royal houses of Scandinavia have the same pedigree as the royal houses of the rest of Europe, right?
Oh, well, there we go. Should we wrap this up?
Yes, let's do. I think Shan's comment here saying that we're knee deep in 2,800-year-old fan fiction is exactly what what this is all about.
I just get more confused every time we speak about this stuff. But that's the good part about it.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that I'd say is that regardless of how you look at this, the awesome thing is that there's so much like pre-Christian cultural material that got to live on. Like, the story of Troy is also pre-Christian cultural material that, people after conversion recognize as important cultural material to maintain and retell in different ways. And that's the fun part of all of this. Like, so much of this stuff is has such a deep history. And so like I wouldn't, if anybody is like sitting out there being bummed out by the fact that it's all Christianity, it's not. The idea of separating between Christianity and not Christianity, except for on certain theological aspects, it's also just not really that meaningful when it comes down to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, it's it isn't that important, and just because somebody points out that it's Christian or at least Christian inspired doesn't mean that you're just shitting on all of it and saying it's all rubbish. It just means maybe take a moment to look at it and take that into consideration when reading it. And I like I said, I enjoy these. The more confused I get, the more I feel like I understand. And I just think, I've said it so many times on this podcast that you just have to be comfortable in that we don't know everything. And there's a lot we don't know. And so much of it is just if, buts, maybes. And you just have to learn to be comfortable in the fact that we just don't know absolutes. And that's fine by me. I enjoy that. I like that. And I like that then you can have conversations about what things may mean. It's fun. It's part of the enjoyment, I think.
I think so too. I mean, I think this is exciting because it's like, it's a literary version of a Sherlock Holmes kind of like crime fiction. Like you're trying to figure out who's the culprit. and where did it all go wrong, those kinds of things, you know, and it's fun.
It is, absolutely. Okay. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to support us, Patreon is the best way. We really do appreciate it. You can sign up for as little as buying one of us a cup of coffee, and you're going to get a bonus episode every week. One is me and Matthias doing a Q&A episode where you can ask us any question. 99.9% of the questions are aimed at Matthias answering the questions that the fans have about this stuff. You know, you may listen to the episodes and have a question. You're like, I wish I could ask an actual professor about this. There you go. You can ask Matthias if you sign up to the Patreon. And the other bonus episode is our story time episode with Jonas Lorentzen, where we read through a saga. And it's just a lot of good fun.
It definitely is. So sign up.
Absolutely. And then you can support us Instagram, Facebook, the Facebook group, the YouTube channel. It's all under just Nordic Mythology Podcast. You can find them there. Please go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Anyway, even just telling a friend about the podcast, sharing it on your own Facebook page, and you know, getting the word out there and telling people to listen is always beneficial to us if you can support us on the Patreon. So thank you very much. It was fun. Oh, if you want to follow Matthias Nordvig on Instagram, I'm Daniel_Fire1 on Instagram, and that's the show.